Lingue originali.
Un libro che vi suggeriamo di leggere, un film che vi consigliamo di vedere. Stiamo parlando di Quel che resta del giorno, scritto da Kazuo Ishiguro e dal quale poi è stato tratto l'omonimo film diretto da James Ivory. Del romanzo di Kazuo Ishiguro, oggi con Marco Piovaz, ascoltiamo l'ultima parte del primo capitolo. Ovviamente siamo a lingue originali e quindi la lettura sarà quella in lingua inglese. Vi ricordo i 3 appuntamenti settimanali con questa trasmissione, oltre che l'edizione dedicata alla letteratura in lingua inglese, quella in lingua tedesca con Nadia Meroni ogni sabato alle ore 22, e quella dedicata alla lingua e alla letteratura francese. L'appuntamento è sempre la domenica sera fino alla fine del mese di giugno e poi da ottobre 2022 con Barbara Masciani. Vi lascio l'ascolto dell'ultima parte del primo capitolo di Quel che resta del giorno, The Remains of the Day di Kazuo Ishiguro. Linea e microfono a Marco Piovaz.
It is quite possible, then, that my employer fully expects me to respond to his bantering in a like manner, and considers my failure to do so a form of negligence. This is, as I say, a matter which has given me much concern. But I must say this business of bantering is not a duty I feel I can ever discharge with enthusiasm. It is all very well in these changing times to adapt one's work, to take in duties not traditionally within one's realm. But bantering is of another dimension altogether. For one thing, how would one know for sure that at any given moment a response of the bantering sort is truly what is expected? One need hardly dwell on the catastrophic possibility of uttering a bantering remark only to discover it wholly inappropriate. I did, though, on one occasion not long ago, pluck up the courage to attempt the required sort of reply. I was serving Mr. Faraday morning coffee in the breakfast room when he had said to me, "I suppose it wasn't you making that crowing noise this morning, Stevens?" My employer was referring, I realized, to a pair of gypsies gathering unwanted iron who had passed by earlier, making their customary calls. As it happened, I had that same morning been giving thought to the dilemma of whether or not I was expected to reciprocate my employer's bantering, and had been seriously worried at how he might be viewing my repeated failure to respond to such openings. I therefore set about thinking of some witty reply, some statement which would still be safely inoffensive in the event of my having misjudged the situation. After a moment or two I said, "More like swallows than crows, I would have said, sir, from the migratory aspect." And I followed this with a suitable modest smile to indicate without ambiguity that I had made a witticism, since I did not wish Mr. Faraday to restrain any spontaneous mirth he felt out of misplaced respectfulness. Mr. Faraday, however, simply looked up at me and said, "I beg your pardon, Stevens." Only then did it occur to me that, of course, my witticism would not be easily appreciated by someone who was not aware that it was gypsies who had passed by. I could not see then how I might press on with this bantering. In fact, I decided it best to call a halt to the matter, and pretending to remember something I had urgently to attend to, excused myself, leaving my employer looking rather bemused. It was then a most discouraging start to what may in fact be an entirely new sort of duty required of me. So discouraging that I must admit I have not really made further attempts along these lines. But at the same time I cannot escape the feeling that Mr. Faraday is not satisfied with my responses to his various banterings. Indeed, his increased persistence of late may even be my employer's way of urging me all the more to respond in a like-minded spirit. Be that as it may, since that first witticism concerning the gypsies, I have not been able to think of other such witticisms quickly enough. Such difficulties as these tend to be all the more preoccupying nowadays, because one does not have the means to discuss and corroborate views with one's fellow professionals in the way once did. Not so long ago, if any such points of ambiguity arose regarding one's duties, one had the comfort of knowing that before long some fellow professional whose opinion one respected would be accompanying his employer to the house, and there would be ample opportunity to discuss the matter. And of course, in Lord Darlington's days, when ladies and gentlemen would often visit for many days on end, it was possible to develop a good understanding with visiting colleagues. Indeed, in those busy days, our servants' hall would often witness a gathering of some of the finest professionals in England, talking late into the night by the warmth of the fire. And let me tell you, if you were to have come into our servants' hall on any of those evenings, you would not have heard mere gossip. More likely, you would have witnessed debates over the great affairs preoccupying our employers upstairs, or else over matters of import reported in the newspaper. And of course, as fellow professionals from all walks of life are wont to do when gathered together, we could be found discussing every aspect of our vocation. Sometimes, naturally, there would be strong disagreements, but more often than not, the atmosphere was dominated by a feeling of mutual respect. Perhaps I will convey a better idea of the tone of those evenings if I say that regular visitors included the likes of Mr. Harry Graham, valet butler to Sir James Chambers, and Mr. John Donalds, valet to Mr. Sidney Dickinson. And there were others, less distinguished perhaps, but whose lively presence made any visit memorable. For instance, Mr. Wilkinson, valet butler to Mr. John Campbell, with his well-known repertoire of impersonations of prominent gentlemen. Mr. Davidson from Easterley House, whose passion in debating a point could be at times as alarming to a stranger as his simple kindness at all other times was endearing. Mr. Herman, valet to Mr. John Henry Peters, whose extreme views no one could listen to passively, but whose distinctive belly laugh and Yorkshire charm made him impossible to dislike. I could go on. There existed in those days a true camaraderie in our profession, whatever the small differences in our approach. We were all essentially cut from the same cloth, so to speak. Not the way it is today, when on the rare occasion an employee accompanies a guest here, he is likely to be some newcomer who has little to say about anything other than association football and who prefers to pass the evening not by the fire of the servants' hall, but drinking at the Ploughman's Arms, or indeed, as seems increasingly likely nowadays, at the Star Inn. I mentioned a moment ago Mr. Graham, the valet butler to Sir James Chambers. In fact, some 2 months ago, I was most happy to learn that Sir James was to visit Darlington Hall. I looked forward to the visit, not only because visitors from Lord Darlington's days are most rare now, Mr. Faraday's circle naturally being quite different from his lordship's, but also because I presumed Mr. Graham would be accompanied by Sir James as of old, and I would thus be able to get his opinion on this question of buntering. I was then both surprised and disappointed to discover a day before the visit that Sir James would be coming alone. Furthermore, during Sir James's subsequent stay, I gathered that Mr. Graham was no longer in Sir James's employ. Indeed, that Sir James no longer employs any full-time staff at all. I would like to have discovered what had become of Mr. Graham, for although we had not known each other well, I would say we had got on those occasions we had met. As it was, however, no suitable opportunity arose for me to gain such information. I must say I was rather disappointed, for I would like to have discussed the bantering question with him. However, let me return to my original thread. I was obliged, as I was saying, to spend some uncomfortable minutes standing in the drawing room yesterday afternoon while Mr. Faraday went about his bantering. I responded as usual by smiling slightly, sufficient at least to indicate that I was participating in some way with the good-humouredness with which he was carrying on, and waited to see if my employer's permission regarding the trip would be forthcoming. As I had anticipated, he gave his kind permission after not too great a delay. And furthermore, Mr. Faraday was good enough to remember and reiterate his generous offer to foot the bill for the gas. So then, there seems to be little reason why I should not undertake my motoring trip to the West Country. I would, of course, have to write to Miss Kenton to tell her I might be passing by. I would also need to see to the matter of the costumes. Various other questions concerning arrangements here in the house during my absence will need to be settled, but all in all I can see no genuine reason why I should not undertake this trip.
A Lingue Originali, Marco Piovaz ha letto per voi in lingua inglese. Lo ritroveremo su Caffè Italia la prossima settimana, venerdì, sempre alle ore 22. Ma Lingue Originali è in onda anche il sabato con Nadia Meroni, con la lettura in lingua tedesca, e la domenica con Barbara Marchand, per quella in lingua francese. Vi ringraziamo per l'ascolto e vi diamo appuntamento a Lingue Originali fra 7 giorni, sempre su Caffè Italia, la radio e il podcast dall'aroma italiano, e non solo.
Lingue Originali.